The Solaris Stellar Academy was not built for humans. Elias Vance felt that truth in every breath of the recycled, crystalline air. The Academy was a monument of the Vrel, an elite military institution carved into a geode orbiting the sun of their home system, its facets glowing with captured starlight. Everything was scaled for their six-limbed, gravity-acclimated physiology. The hallways, wide enough for a squadron of Vrel, felt like canyons. The doorways, designed for their squat, powerful frames, forced Elias to duck his 6-foot human height. Even the ambient hum of the facility vibrated at a frequency that made his teeth ache. He was a ghost here, a walking paradox. He was the first, and likely the last, human cadet to ever set foot in the Solaris Stellar Academy. His presence was not born of alliance or trust, but of a precarious political treaty. Earth had earned its place at the galactic table after a long, bloody conflict with the Cathar hegemony, a war the Vrel had watched from a safe distance. Elias's father, General Vance, had commanded the fleet that delivered the decisive blow, a strategic masterstroke that had won humanity its sovereignty and, ironically, made him a pariah to the Vrel establishment. The Academy slot was a cruel concession, a bone thrown to humanity to prove a nascent galactic unity. Everyone knew it was a setup for failure. As he walked down the polished obsidian corridors, he felt the weight of 1,000 alien stares. The other cadets, a mix of Vrel, the lithe, feline-like Kryll, and the stoic, crystalline-bodied Valerians, parted for him as if he were carrying a plague. Their multifaceted eyes, some glowing with bioluminescence, others reflecting light like cut gems, followed him. He heard the clicks and whistles of the Vrel language, sharp and dismissive. They called him the mongrel, a term of biological contempt. He was the one who had taken the place of a worthy Vrel warrior, the one whose species had dared to stand tall without their patronage. As he walked down the polished obsidian corridors, he felt the weight of 1,000 alien stares. The other cadets, a mix of Vrel, the lithe, feline-like Kryll, and the stoic, crystalline-bodied Valerians, parted for him as if he were carrying a plague. Their multifaceted eyes, some glowing with bioluminescence, others reflecting light like cut gems, followed him. He heard the clicks and whistles of the Vrel language, sharp and dismissive. They called him the mongrel, a term of biological contempt. He was the one who had taken the place of a worthy Vrel warrior, the one whose species had dared to stand tall without their patronage. He clutched his data slate, its smooth surface a cold comfort in his hand. He was on his way to his first class, Advanced Strategic Deconstruction, taught by Instructor Kaelen. The name alone was a cold knot in his gut. Kaelen, the one who had commanded the Vrel observer fleet during the Battle of Xylos Prime. The very battle that had secured humanity's freedom but had also seen a Vrel dreadnought, the Ironclaw, obliterated by a stray Cathar mine. Official reports called it an accident. Elias knew the truth. His father's plan had relied on Kaelen's ships being in that specific sector to create a diversion, a gamble that had paid off for humanity but cost Kaelen his brother, who had served on the Ironclaw's bridge. Kaelen had sworn vengeance on the Vance name, and now, here in the heart of the Vrel military, he was an instructor. Elias wasn't just here to pass. He was here to face a ghost from his father's past, a man who saw in him not a cadet, but a living, breathing reprisal. He arrived at the classroom. The door hissed open, revealing a tiered chamber lined with gleaming control consoles. The class was already full, the air thick with the scent of ozone and the subtle, earthy perfume of Vrel pheromones. Elias saw the usual sneers, the averted glances. He took the one empty seat, a small, recessed alcove at the back, feeling the isolation like a physical barrier. The instructor strode into the room, and the buzz of conversation died instantly. Kaelen was a magnificent, terrifying specimen of his species. His 6 limbs were corded with muscle, 2 serving as powerful legs, 2 as manipulators, and a third pair, tipped with wickedly sharp claws, folded neatly against his broad carapace. His head, adorned with a crest of iridescent feathers, was held high. His multifaceted eyes, a deep, unsettling crimson, scanned the room. When they landed on Elias, they narrowed to 2 pinpricks of pure loathing. Cadets, Kaelen's voice was a deep rumble, resonating with a power modulator in his throat. Today we will begin our first exercise in strategic deconstruction. You will be given a tactical scenario, and you will find its single, fatal flaw. He gestured with a clawed hand, and a holoscreen materialized in the center of the room, displaying a complex star chart of a simulated battle. Analyze and report. The cadet who finds the flaw first will be rewarded. His eyes never left Elias. The one who fails will be disciplined. The other cadets immediately went to work, their 4 manipulators flying across their consoles, their minds already a blur of calculations. Elias felt a familiar pressure. The Vrel mind, honed over millennia for war, processed data at a terrifying speed. Their memory was eidetic, their logic cold and infallible. He, by contrast, relied on intuition, on lateral thinking, the very human traits that had won them the war against the Cather. He focused on the simulation. A standard ambush scenario, a Kryll supply convoy trapped between 2 Cather assault fleets. The Vrel solution would be a brutal, direct counterattack, overwhelming one of the fleets. It was efficient, logical, and deeply flawed. The flaw wasn't in the ship's placement or their weapon loadouts. The flaw was in the assumption. Elias had a moment of pure clarity. He raised his hand. The motion was so unexpected that the entire class paused, their clicking manipulators stilled. Kaelen's crimson eyes hardened. "Vance," he rumbled, his voice laced with venom. "You have a question?" "Not a question, Instructor," Elias said, his voice level despite the tremor of adrenaline. "I believe I have the flaw." A ripple of scornful clicks and hisses went through the room. A Vrel cadet behind Elias, a hulking brute named Jax, let out a short, guttural bark of laughter. Kaelen leaned forward, his massive form exuding menace. "Do you, human, are you so arrogant as to believe you can outthink my class on your first day?" "The flaw is in the convoy, sir," Elias stated, ignoring the derision. "The Kryll supply convoy isn't a supply convoy at all. It's a lure, a decoy. The real target isn't the Cather fleets, but a weapons depot on the nearby moon, which is undefended because all forces are being drawn to the convoy. The entire setup is a distraction." The silence that followed was absolute. Kaelen's expression was unreadable for a moment, then a slow, terrible smile stretched his jaw. "Incorrect, cadet," he said, his voice a low growl. "The convoy is a legitimate target. You are to treat the simulation as given, not add superfluous variables based on fantasy." He turned his back to Elias. "Jax, you will show the class the correct solution." Elias felt a surge of disbelief and fury. He was right. He knew he was right. Kaelen had dismissed him out of hand, not because he was wrong, but because he was human. Just as Jax began to speak, a different voice cut through the air. "Begging the instructor's pardon, but the human is not incorrect." Elias's head snapped up. The voice was smooth, melodic, and undeniably female. It belonged to a Kryll cadet seated near the front. She had the elegant features of her species, silver fur that shimmered with a faint bioluminescence, intelligent emerald eyes, and ears that twitched with every sound. Unlike the other Kryll, whose expressions were usually inscrutable, hers was open, curious. Kaelen turned to face her, his massive frame radiating disapproval. "Cadet Lyra, you will not interrupt." "Instructor, the tactical data does indeed show a recent Kryll covert operation on a moon base within the sector," she said calmly, her voice belying the insubordination. "The convoy's manifest shows an unusual quantity of non-essential resources, a known Kryll tactic for a diversionary shipment. The human's deduction, while unorthodox, is supported by the data." A murmur of surprise went through the class. Lyra was one of the top cadets, a strategist of renown even among the fiercely competitive Kryll. For her to support the despised human, it was unheard of. Kaelen's carapace rippled with suppressed fury. His eyes burned into Lyra for a long, tense moment. He had been so focused on humiliating Elias that he hadn't considered the variables himself, a cardinal sin for an instructor. He had been blinded by his hatred, and Lyra had called him on it. "The scenario is as presented," he said, his voice dangerously low. "A frontal assault. No diversions. This is my class, and my methods are to be followed. Cadet Lyra, a demerit for insubordination. And Cadet Vance, a demerit for flawed reasoning." The class went back to work, but the atmosphere had changed. The tension was palpable. Elias's fury had been replaced by a quiet, simmering resolve. He was right, and Kaelen was a coward, using his power to dismiss a correct answer out of sheer prejudice. But more than that, he now had a new puzzle to solve. The silver-furred Kryll who had dared to speak up for him. Later that day, Elias was in the mess hall, picking at the nutrient paste that tasted suspiciously like recycled sand. He was alone, as always. The other cadets sat in their distinct species groups, their chatter and laughter an alien symphony that he was not a part of. He felt a presence, and looked up to see Lyra standing over his table. She held a tray with her own meal, a bowl of steamed fungi and something that looked like glowing algae. "The tactical tables were correct," she said without preamble, her emerald eyes fixed on him. "You were right. Kaelen is vindictive, and his hatred for your species is well known." Elias's throat was suddenly dry. "Why did you say anything?" She shrugged a slender shoulder. "Truth is truth. Strategy is strategy. My father taught me to always trust the data. And the data supported your claim. It got you a demerit," he pointed out. "A small price for a large lesson," she said. "He will try to break you, you know. He will find your weaknesses and exploit them until you fail out. That is his strategy." Elias swallowed a mouthful of the tasteless paste. "And you? What's your strategy?" "To graduate at the top of my class," she said simply. "And to see an interesting mind not wasted." She gestured with a graceful paw toward the empty seat across from him. "May I?" He nodded, a sense of shock and cautious hope fluttering in his chest. She sat down, her movements fluid and silent. "My name is Lyra. Lyra of the Night Stalking clan. Elias Vance, of the human species." She gave a small, feline smile. "I know. You are famous, mongrel." The insult, delivered by her, didn't sting. It was a statement of fact. "So," she continued, her eyes thoughtful. "Tell me how you saw it." "The decoy. Most Vrel would have missed it. They focus on brute force, not deception. Humans, it seems, have a different way of thinking." He began to explain his thought process, the way his mind had instinctively looked for the emotional and psychological weak points in the simulation. He talked about misdirection and bluffing, concepts that were foreign to the Vrel but were cornerstones of human strategy. As he spoke, he saw a flicker of genuine interest in her eyes. It was the first time since he had arrived that he felt like he was being seen, not just judged. This shared moment, born of a conflict with Kaelen, was a fragile thing. He knew it could be shattered by the next class, the next confrontation, the next wave of prejudice. But for now, here in the cavernous mess hall, two outcasts, a scorned human and a maverick Kryll, had found a strange, unspoken alliance. It was the beginning of his true fight. The fight for respect. The fight for vengeance. And, though he didn't know it yet, the fight for her. The academy was quiet at night, a silence so profound it felt like a vacuum. Elias had come to appreciate the solitude of the late hours in the human quarters, a small, insulated pod tucked away in a remote wing. It was the only place where he wasn't under the weight of 1,000 alien eyes. He spent the time studying, poring over ancient Vrel military doctrines, dissecting their cold, efficient logic. He was looking for weaknesses, for cracks in their flawless armor. He was looking for Kaelen. The memory of Lyra's support was a warm ember in his mind. The demerit she had received for defending him had been a point of honor for her, a gesture of defiance against the very hierarchy she was meant to serve. He couldn't afford to be a liability to her. He had to prove he was worth the risk. He had to be more than just the human curiosity, more than the son of General Vance. The next morning's class, Applied Astrogation and Evasion, was a practical test on the Academy's advanced simulation platform. The cavernous chamber was a starship bridge writ large, complete with holographic consoles and a massive viewport that simulated the black expanse of space. Elias stood at his station, his heart pounding a familiar rhythm of dread and determination. Kaelen strode onto the bridge, his 6 limbs moving with a predator's grace. His crimson eyes scanned the room, lingering on Elias with undisguised contempt. "Today, cadets, we will test your ability to navigate a hostile environment," his voice rumbled. "You will be placed in a single pilot vessel and tasked with reaching a destination point. A simple test. The obstacle? A simulated Cather patrol. They will be programmed to track and destroy you." A flicker of a smile crossed Kaelen's face. "You will not be fighting them. You will be running. The objective is evasion. First cadet to reach the waypoint wins." He pointed a clawed hand at the screen. "Lyra, you will go first." Lyra moved to her station, her silver fur a stark contrast to the polished metal of the bridge. Her movements were precise, her fingers a blur over the controls. The simulation launched. the viewscreen filled with the swirling nebula of a simulated hostile sector. Lyra's starship, a sleek, agile Kryll scout, darted through the gas clouds. She was a master, her mind calculating escape vectors and evasion tactics with a speed that left Elias in awe. The cadet ships, represented by glowing red triangles, gave chase, but she was always one step ahead, a ghost in the stars. She reached the waypoint in a record-breaking 10 minutes, the entire process executed with a graceful efficiency that silenced even the most cynical of the Vrel cadets. Kaelen's expression was flat, but Elias saw the grudging respect in his eyes. "Excellent, Cadet Lyra," Kaelen said, his voice clipped. He then turned his gaze on Elias. "Now, for the mongrel. Let's see how a human runs." A few of the Vrel cadets snickered. Jax, the hulking Vrel from the day before, let out a low, guttural growl. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. This was it. Kaelen's real test. Elias took his place at the console. The simulation launched, and the viewscreen filled with the same nebula. His ship, however, was not a nimble Kryll scout, but a sluggish, human-designed transport. It was slow, cumbersome, and its shields were a fraction of the strength of the Vrel vessels. It was a setup. Kaelen had not just given him a demerit, he had set him up for a public, catastrophic failure. The cadet ships appeared on his radar, 3 of them, converging on his position. He pushed the throttle, but the ship lumbered forward, its thrusters whining in protest. The Vrel cadets began to click and hiss, a collective sound of contempt. Lyra, from her station, watched with narrowed eyes, her tail twitching in agitation. Kaelen's voice came over the comms, a low, sadistic purr. "The objective is evasion, Cadet Vance. I suggest you get started. Their weapons are calibrated for a single-shot kill." Elias ignored him. He knew he couldn't outrun them. He had to do something else. He glanced at the star chart on his console, and a wild idea took hold. The Vrel, he remembered, were all about brute force, direct confrontation. They would never consider using the environment against their enemies. He would. "Rerouting all power to thrusters," he said, his voice a steady monotone. He was no longer a human in an alien academy. He was a pilot again, alone in the vastness of space. "What is the human doing?" Jax snarled. "He's going in a straight line." Elias wasn't going in a straight line. He was heading directly for a massive asteroid field, a graveyard of floating rocks and debris that the Vrel would consider too hazardous to enter at high speed. The cadet ships, programmed with Vrel tactics, slowed to a crawl, navigating the field with caution. They expected him to do the same. He didn't. He pushed the throttle to maximum, ignoring the proximity alarms blaring on his console. His ship bounced and scraped off a few rocks, its hull groaning in protest. He could hear Kaelen's stunned silence. He flew not through the field, but used it as a shield, the massive asteroids acting as cover. He was a blur of calculated chaos, a human hummingbird in a world of alien rocks. He used the momentum of each near miss to slingshot himself to the next rock. He was not thinking like a pilot, he was thinking like a gambler. It was a tactic based on speed, intuition, and a willingness to accept risk. The kind of risk his father had taken at Xylo's prime. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it. A glint of light from Kaelen's console. Kaelen had just added a massive, fast-moving asteroid to his flight path, a direct collision course. It was an impossible obstacle, a maneuver designed to end the simulation in a fireball and prove Elias's reckless human nature would lead to his doom. Just as he was about to hit the rock, he heard a new voice over the comms, a soft, melodic whisper. "Roll left on axis 4. He didn't hesitate. He knew the voice. Lyra. He didn't know how she was doing it, but he trusted her. He pushed the stick, and his ship veered sharply, scraping a micromillimeter past the asteroid, the sound of the metal groaning like a banshee. He shot out the other side, his ship battered but intact. The cadet ships, having just seen him perform an impossible maneuver, were momentarily stunned. He used the opportunity to make his final approach to the waypoint. He reached it. The simulation ended, a stark, white message flashing across the viewscreen. Success. Silence. The Vrel cadets were stunned, their multifaceted eyes fixed on him. Lyra gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Kaelen's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had tried to break him, to prove his human inferiority, and Elias had used human intuition and a stolen moment of help to win. That was a fluke, Kaelen spat, his voice trembling with fury. An unprofessional and reckless display of incompetence. You would be dead on a real battlefield. And you would be dead because you don't know how to adapt to a new threat, Instructor, Elias said, his voice low and steady. My father knew that. I know that. The Cadet know that. Kaelen's 6 limbs tensed. He took a menacing step toward Elias. You speak of your father's name in my presence, he snarled. That is your final warning, human. Your arrogance will be your end. That evening, Elias found Lyra on an observation deck that overlooked the Academy's central docking bay. It was a vast, open space where cargo haulers and military frigates, tiny in the immense scale of the Vrel world, came and went like insects. He stood beside her, the silence between them comfortable. Thank you, he said, the words feeling too small. For the assist. On the comms. You saved my ship and, I think, my life in this academy. She watched a freighter pass into the bay. Your mind is unorthodox, she said. A puzzle. You see solutions where none of us would dare to look. And your mind is a quantum computer, but you still saw Kaelen cheating. How did you do it? She turned to him, her emerald eyes catching the reflection of a passing ship. It is in the data. Kaelen has a unique neural signature when he manipulates the simulation. I tracked it. He thought no one was paying attention. He underestimated me. The same way he underestimates you. He hates my father, Elias said, the words a confession. He lost his brother at the Battle of Xylos Prime. He blames my father. Lyra's ears flicked. I know. The story is a legend in our ranks. The Ironclaw was a powerful vessel. The loss was significant. But the official reports do not match the data. What do you mean? The Ironclaw was not destroyed by a stray mine, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was a human-engineered weapon. A targeted sonic pulse, designed to disable its cloaking shield. It worked, but it triggered a chain reaction in its proximity to the Cadet mines. It was a calculated risk on your father's part. A human weapon, an alien shield, and Kaelen's fleet in the wrong place at the wrong time. He chose to save his own fleet and let the Ironclaw perish. Elias felt a cold shock. He had always known the truth was ugly, but he hadn't known the details. His father hadn't just gambled and won. He had gambled with Vrel lives, and Kaelen had let his brother die to save himself. His vengeance was not just about the loss of a brother, but about the shame of his own failure. My father's plan was to win the war, not to make friends, Elias said, the words tasting bitter. Lyra looked at him, her gaze soft. And what about your plan? I'm here to prove him wrong, Elias said, the truth of it suddenly clear to him. Kaelen's hatred, his racism, his entire philosophy, it's flawed. It's a coward's philosophy. My father proved that human strategy is valid. I'm here to prove that a human cadet can be a great warrior. I'm here to prove him wrong. He saw a flicker of admiration in her eyes, a new kind of respect. A fine goal, human, she said softly. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the alien ships glide into the bay. Elias felt the quiet intimacy of the moment. He was no longer just the outcast. He was standing with an equal, a fellow outcast in a world that didn't want them. He felt a different kind of warmth, something that had nothing to do with the Academy's recycled air. He had come here for vengeance, but he was finding a purpose he hadn't known he needed. He was finding her. The next challenge, he knew, would be worse. Kaelen would not let his defeat stand. But Elias was no longer alone. He had a brilliant strategist, a kindred spirit, a friend he was quickly starting to fall for, at his side. And in this cold, sterile academy, that was a weapon more powerful than any starship. Their shared meals became a quiet ritual. They would meet in a secluded corner of the mess hall, away from the snickers of the Vrel and the wary gazes of the other species. It was their own little island in a sea of hostility. Lyra would share stories of her home world, a place of sprawling, shimmering forests and cities built into the canopies of giant trees. She spoke of her clan's history as silent, stealthy hunters, and how that legacy had translated into her uncanny ability for tactical analysis. Elias, in turn, found himself opening up about his life on Earth, a world she only knew from dry, sanitized diplomatic reports. He described the vast, open skies, the feeling of rain on his skin, the laughter of children playing in a park. He even told her about his father, the brilliant, ruthless strategist who had always been distant, a general more than a dad. He spoke of the pressure he felt to live up to the Vance name, but also the resentment he held for the collateral damage that came with it. Lyra listened with an intensity that made him feel like he was the only person in the universe. Her emerald eyes, so sharp and analytical in the classroom, were soft and full of a genuine curiosity he had never seen before. She didn't just hear his words, she absorbed them, asked insightful questions, and offered quiet, comforting observations. "Your species is so driven by emotion," she said one night, her voice a low murmur. "You carry your past like a great burden. Doesn't your species?" he asked. She shook her head. "We do not mourn in the same way. We learn. The dead are lessons, not burdens. To carry their sadness is to become a weaker warrior." She paused, her eyes on him. "But you carry it for all of them. The pain of the past. The vengeance you seek. It is a source of your strength. It is a dangerous path." Elias couldn't argue with that. The vengeance against Kaelen was a fire in his gut, a raw, burning need. But sitting with Lyra, in the quiet hum of the mess hall, the fire felt different. It was less about destruction and more about proving something to himself, and to her. Their conversations moved beyond strategy and history. He taught her how to play a game from Earth called chess, a game of calculated moves and deceptive feints that she found fascinating. She would lose the first few games, her mind working to understand the human-centric rules and the subtle psychological warfare of the game. Then, her brilliant mind would kick in, and she would begin to anticipate his moves, her slender fingers a blur as she moved her pieces with a newfound predatory grace. Soon, she was beating him, her face a mask of triumph as her queen took his king. He, in turn, tried to learn the nuances of the Vrel and Kryll languages, the guttural clicks and soft whistles that were so alien to his ear. Lyra was a patient teacher, her voice melodic as she corrected his pronunciation. He found himself loving the way her ears would twitch when he finally got a phrase right, a clear sign of her pleasure. One evening, after an especially frustrating day of training, they sat on the observation deck again. He had stumbled on a physical training course, his human physiology no match for the Viral's 6 limbs and superior strength. Jax had made sure to point this out, his sneers sharper than usual. "They will always find a way to remind you that you are different," Lyra said, her voice soft as she watched him rub a sore shoulder. "Do not let them. Your difference is your strength." He looked at her silver fur and emerald eyes, and saw not an alien, but a kindred spirit. He had been an outsider his whole life, but he had never had a friend like her. He felt a sudden, powerful urge to reach out and touch her paw, to bridge the physical gap between them. He stopped himself. He didn't know the customs of her people, didn't know if such a gesture would be an insult. Instead, he simply said, "You're the only person who doesn't see me as a weapon, or a mongrel, or a lesson. You see me." Her ears flattened slightly, a sign of her own vulnerability. "And I hope you see me," she said. "Not as a symbol of my clan, or as Kaelen's rival, but simply as Lyra." The air between them was charged with something new, something deeper than friendship. It was a shared understanding, a quiet admiration that was blossoming into something more. In the cold, alien silence of the academy, they had found a warmth that promised to heal the wounds of their pasts. They had built a fragile, beautiful bond, a secret alliance that was quickly becoming the one thing Elias truly cared about in this hostile world. The next confrontation with Kaelen, he realized, wouldn't just be a fight for his own pride, but a fight to protect the only person who had ever truly stood by his side. The next week, Kaelen's class was held in the Combat Scenarios Chamber, a massive, domed space that could simulate any environment from deep space to a planet's surface. The air was thick with tension. Kaelen's eyes, like twin red embers, roamed the room before settling on Elias and Lyra. "Today, you will learn the true meaning of Vrel strategy, overwhelming force and ruthless efficiency," he announced, his voice a low rumble. "The exercise is a simple 2-on-2. You will be paired with an ally against another team. The objective is to retrieve the enemy's data core and return it to your own base. The enemy team will be led by Cadet Jax. Your ally, Vance, will be Cadet Lyra." A murmur of surprise went through the crowd. Pairing the two outcasts was a calculated move. Kaelen was forcing them to work together, betting that their combined differences would be their downfall. He was putting them on display, a public spectacle designed for their humiliation. Elias and Lyra moved to their designated stations. Jax stood across the field with his partner, a Valyrian cadet. The Valyrians were slow, but their crystalline bodies made them incredibly durable, and they were masters of long-range energy weapons. It was a classic Vrel brute force team: Jax, a living tank, and his Valyrian partner, an unstoppable artillery piece. The simulation began. The environment was a jagged, lunar landscape of sharp, black rock and frozen dust. Their base was a small rock outcrop with a gleaming core. The enemy's was a half-mile away, nestled in a ravine. "Jax will come straight at us," Elias said, his eyes scanning the holographic map. "It's his only tactic. The Valyrian will provide covering fire." "Agreed," Lyra replied, her fingers flying across her console, bringing up tactical data. "My analysis indicates Jax's armor is strongest at the chest and weakest at his joints. The Valyrian's weapon has a maximum effective range of a quarter mile. We can't outfight them," Elias said, "so we need to outthink them." A flicker of a smile crossed his face. "We'll use Kaelen's own strategy against him." Lyra looked at him, her emerald eyes filled with a flash of understanding. She had seen his unorthodox mind at work before. "A feint," she whispered. "Better. We're going to use a gambit. We let them think they have us cornered. Then we hit them where they least expect it." They took up positions on the rocky outcrop. As expected, Jax began his methodical advance, his 6 limbs pounding the dust. The Valyrian took a high position, its crystalline arm beginning to glow as it charged a shot. "He's closing fast," Lyra said, her voice calm. "We need to move." "Wait," Elias ordered, his heart pounding. He saw the gleam of light from Kaelen's instructor station again. A new variable, a new trap. The ground began to vibrate. "Seismic activity, localized," Lyra's voice was sharp with alarm. "A sinkhole, directly in front of Jax's path. Kaelen is trying to force them to detour, to get closer to us." Elias knew it was a bluff. Kaelen would never risk his prize cadet. The sinkhole was an illusion, a test to see if Elias would betray his ally by running. "Don't move," he said to Lyra. Jax, with a contemptuous snort, stomped his foot directly into the simulated sinkhole. He was expecting the solid ground he was promised, but instead, he sank to his knee, a look of pure shock on his face. Kaelen's face, projected on the main screen, was a mask of bewildered rage. He had tried to trick Elias, but instead, had just revealed his blatant manipulation. "Now," Elias yelled. Lyra, with the speed of a startled viper, darted from behind their cover. She wasn't running for their data core, she was running for the Valyrian. Elias used the distraction to sprint toward the enemy base, his smaller human form a blur against the black rocks. The Valyrian, a creature of logic, expected to be attacked from a distance. But Lyra, with a grace born of 100 generations of stealthy hunters, was on it in a second, her silver fur a streak of moonlight. She darted beneath its legs, a quick swipe of her paw disabling its targeting sensors. The Valyrian fired a wild shot that detonated harmlessly against the rocks. Elias reached the enemy base, Jax still struggling in the sinkhole. He snatched the data core and ran for his own base. Jax, now free, began to give chase, a furious roar in his throat. "He is gaining on you," Lyra yelled over the comms. "Distance is closing, 100 meters, 50, 20. Elias wasn't running, he was running to a specific point. The sinkhole. He feinted left, forcing Jax to overcompensate, and then leapt right, landing on the very edge of the pit. Jax, with the furious momentum of a freight train, couldn't stop. He thundered past Elias and plunged into the sinkhole, his roar of fury turning into a shriek of rage as he disappeared. Elias walked the final few steps to his base, the data core held high. The screen flashed, victory. Silence. The Vrel cadets stared in disbelief. They had just watched a human and a Kryll use cunning and instinct to outwit a Vrel warrior and their most esteemed instructor. Kaelen's crimson eyes were narrowed to slits. He was not just angry, he was broken. Elias had not just won, he had defeated his entire philosophy. Later, as they walked out of the chamber, the other cadets parted for them, but this time, it was not with contempt. It was with a grudging respect. Even Jax, dripping with simulated dust, gave Elias a long, hard stare that was not hatred, but a reluctant acknowledgement of skill. Lyra gave Elias a smile, a rare, open expression of pure joy. "You did it," she said, her ears twitching with pride. "No," he said, looking at her. "We did it." Their alliance was no longer a secret. It was a public fact. Kaelen had tried to use it as a weapon against them, but they had turned it into a shield. Now, Elias knew, the game was over. Kaelen would no longer resort to cheap tricks. The vengeance he sought would be personal. The real fight had just begun. Kaelen waited. His rage, a cold, calculated fire, had eclipsed his previous contempt. He had been a predator toying with his prey, but now the prey had defied him, and in doing so, had exposed a fatal flaw in his own logic. Elias Vance, the human, had humiliated him. But worse, he had done it with the aid of a Kryll, one of his own top students. This was no longer a class exercise. It was a matter of honor, and Vrel honor demanded blood. He watched Elias and Lyra from a remote camera feed as they walked to their quarters, their figures small but defiant. He saw the way the Kryll cadet's ears twitched with pride, the way the human's shoulders relaxed when he was near her. He saw the strength they drew from each other. That was the flaw, not Elias's tactics, but his alliance. He had to break that bond. He waited for the midnight rotation, when the Academy's less monitored training corridors were empty. He made his way to the physical combat dojo, a Spartan room with padded flooring and a few scattered training drones. He knew Elias frequented this room late at night, a human's futile attempt to overcome his physical limitations. Elias arrived precisely at the hour, his figure alone in the vast, empty room. He began his warm-up routine, the slow, rhythmic movements of a human martial art. Kaelen watched from the shadows, his 6 limbs coiled. He could feel the human's heartbeat, the rhythm a stark contrast to his own cold, predatory stillness. A private lesson, Vance, Kaelen's voice, unamplified and raw, cut through the silence. Elias's head snapped up, his body tensing instantly. He hadn't heard the instructor approach. Kaelen stepped into the light, his crimson eyes gleaming with a terrible intensity. "The simulations are not the real battlefield," Kaelen said, his voice a low growl. "And on the real battlefield, there are no allies to save you." Elias stood his ground. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, mongrel," Kaelen spat, taking a menacing step forward. "You cheated. Your Kryll pet fed you data. You rely on lies and trickery. Just like your father." Elias felt a flash of cold fury. "My father won. You hid. You let your brother die." That was the line. Kaelen's 6 limbs uncoiled, his roar of rage echoing through the chamber. He moved with a terrifying speed, a blur of muscle and carapace. Elias barely had time to raise his arms in a block. The blow was a sledgehammer of force, and Elias was thrown across the room, his head hitting a padded wall with a sickening thud. The world swam for a moment. "The human body is so weak," Kaelen sneered, his clawed hand wrapping around Elias's throat, lifting him off the ground. A single, pitiful weapon, against the might of a Vrel warrior. Elias struggled, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. His vision was going dark, spots dancing before his eyes. Kaelen's grip was tightening, and Elias knew this wasn't a drill. He was going to die here, alone. Then, a sudden shriek of fury cut through the air. Lyra, her silver fur bristling, a small energy cutter in her hand, leapt from the entrance. Her movements were a whirlwind of focused precision. She dodged Kaelen's powerful legs and drove the cutter into the instructor's thigh. It was a shallow, painful cut, but it was enough. Kaelen let out a roar of pain and dropped Elias, who crumpled to the floor, gasping for air. "Get out of here, Elias!" Lyra screamed, her emerald eyes blazing with a ferocity he had never seen. She stood before him, her small body a shield against the enraged Vrel. Kaelen looked from the cut on his leg to the fiery Kryll cadet, his rage now boiling over into something truly monstrous. "You," he snarled, taking a step toward her. "You are a traitor to your own kind. I will end you both." Final confrontation. Elias scrambled to his feet, his vision clearing just in time to see Kaelen raise a clawed hand to strike Lyra. The instructor was a physical titan, his 6 limbs a blur of motion. But Elias had learned from his tactical mind. He saw the pattern. Kaelen's movements were powerful, but they were also predictable. They were a Vrel warrior's moves, based on brute force and a lifetime of overwhelming lesser foes. "He's not fighting you, Lyra," Elias yelled, his voice raw. "He's fighting his brother. He's fighting his memory." The words struck Kaelen like a physical blow. He froze, his arm mid-swing. The crimson glow in his eyes flickered, replaced for a second by a flicker of pained confusion. It was the moment they needed. Lyra didn't hesitate. She was a hunter, and she had just seen her prey's weakness. She darted forward, her lithe body a silvery streak. She didn't go for his head or his carapace. She went for his legs. She struck with a flurry of swift, precise kicks, targeting the tendons and ligaments that held his powerful frame together. Kaelen roared, a sound of frustrated rage and agony. He was a war machine, but she was a surgeon of combat. Elias, still dazed, lunged for the fallen energy cutter. His hands, though not as strong as a viral's, were still humanly quick. He got a grip on the weapon and turned it toward Kaelen, not to harm him, but to end the fight. He disabled the power source, turning the weapon into a harmless piece of metal. Kaelen, seeing the human with a blade in his hand, let out another guttural roar and charged. But Lyra had already done her work. As he moved, his movements were clumsy, his balance off. He stumbled, his huge frame crashing into the training drones, sending them flying like broken toys. Elias stood his ground. He didn't run. He had come here for vengeance, but he had found something else. He had found a love that was a shield, and a purpose that was not just about revenge, but about justice. "You didn't let your brother die, Kaelen," Elias said, his voice ringing with newfound confidence. "My father gave you a choice. Save your fleet or save your brother. And you chose your fleet. You chose to be a coward. Your rage is not for my father. It's for yourself." Kaelen was on the ground now, his 6 limbs trembling with a mixture of pain and fury. The shame of his past was finally, publicly, laid bare. Just then, a pair of Vrel security officers, attracted by the noise, burst into the chamber. They saw the fallen instructor and the 2 cadets standing over him, their positions a stark reversal of power. They saw Kaelen, the great warrior, humbled, his armor scratched and his dignity in tatters. Conclusion. The Academy's disciplinary hearing was swift and brutal. Kaelen's position as an instructor gave him a degree of protection, but Elias and Lyra had irrefutable proof of his sabotage in the simulations and his violent, unprovoked attack in the dojo. Lyra's tactical logs from the dojo were a masterstroke, a silent recording of the entire event, from Kaelen's unhinged monologue to his clumsy attacks. The data didn't lie. Kaelen was stripped of his rank and honor, his career ended in disgrace. The Vrel, for all their pride, valued truth and data above all else, and the truth had been a poison to him. He was not a warrior, he was a coward, consumed by a lie he had told himself for years. Elias and Lyra became legends in the Academy. No longer the despised mongrel and the defiant maverick, they were a force to be reckoned with. The other cadets, even the hostile Vrel, now looked at Elias with grudging respect, and at Lyra with newfound admiration. Their victory was a testament to a new kind of strategy, one that blended human ingenuity with Kryll precision, and was fueled by an emotional bond that the Vrel, for all their logic, could never comprehend. Their love was no longer a secret. In the quiet solitude of the observation deck, they would often meet, their hands touching, a small, shared comfort in the vastness of space. Elias finally felt at peace. His vengeance was complete, not with death, but with a different kind of justice. He had come here for a fight, but he had found something more important. He had found a home, and in her, he had found his place in the universe.